Um, okay, welcome. And I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves first, starting with Phyllis.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Phyllis. I'm in New Orleans, and happy to be here.
Okay. Marva.
Good morning. My name is Martha. I'm located in New Orleans. Glad to be here. Every Saturday is a learning experience.
Thanks. I agree. Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate. I've been coming to Erace since my first year, learning a lot of stuff. And I'm here in Northern Kentucky, right outside of Cincinnati. Glad to be here.
Oh, okay. Great. Michelle.
Good morning, I'm Michelle, and I'm coming to you from Austin. Louise Johnson introduced me to Erace last summer, so I've been coming for about almost a year now, and I do enjoy all these conversations. Thanks for having me.
Great. Lynn.
Good morning. I'm Lynn Frank. I live in the same neighborhood as Bill and Cindy, and they're the ones who introduced me to Erace. Nice to see everyone.
Great. Louise.
Hi, I'm Louise, and I've been coming to Erace on and off for over 2 decades. In fact, when the beautiful Beatrice used to attend the meetings in New Orleans. But since Katrina, we've moved to Austin, and myself, Michelle, are trying to start a chapter here in Austin.
Great. Beatrice.
Hi, good morning. I'm here in East Point, and thanks for that compliment. Beautiful Beatrice, oh my goodness. But thank you, and I'm always so glad to be with you all. It is a learning experience, and I'm so glad that we endure. Thank you.
Great. Nora.
Hi, I'm Nora. I'm in Austin.
Great.
Don't know why I'm so late and I really like hearing me a lot.
Great. Cindy.
Good morning, everybody. I've been running errands even at this hour. It's kind of crazy. I'm glad to see you all. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Nancy.
Good morning. I'm Nancy. I've been coming to Erace since June of 2007.
Great. Marion.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marion. I am a little rushed. Every Saturday morning, there's some message on the computer saying you have no internet access. And of course, it's a big tale. So here I am. I've been coming to the Erace discussion since 1993. It's good to see everybody.
Thanks. Leonetta.
Good morning, everybody. I've been I'm part of Erace since I was an intern and I'm undergrad at Southern University.
Great. Glenn.
Good morning. My name is Glenn, and I've been a member of Erace since 1994. Look forward to the morning discussion.
Terrific. Becky. You have to unmute.
Yeah, I'm Becky Richardson. I'm speaking to you from near Boston, north of Boston, and I'm very pleased we're having this particular discussion. It's very important, I think. So thank you very much.
Pedro.
Yes, good morning. I'm very disappointed to say that I won't be able to attend the meeting, but just wanted to express my solidarity with the group. The article was outstanding, and so is the subject matter. I just have some other work commitments that I just got to get back to. But thank you. Have a great discussion. See you next week.
Okay, thanks, Pedro. Greer,
My name is Greer. I've been coming to Erase since, I guess, about post-Katrina, maybe 2007, 2008. I enjoy coming. I enjoy the topics. I always learn something that I didn't know, or I also get different views on opinions. I love hearing people's opinions because we're all different people and we all have different experiences, and they're all valid. Thank you.
great, thanks, Greer. Richard, Richard, you have to unmute. Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I just joined, starting up a new and hopefully better computer. So are you doing introductions?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I'm Richard. I'm going by my middle name. Most of you know me by my other name, but I'm still preferring to use Richard for this discussion. Longtime Eracism member, going back to its beginning days, and also facilitator, and happy to be back with you again.
Okay, great. Well, that's everybody who's joined so far.
Hello?
Erace is very valuable to Cindy and I, and it is a group that constructively discusses issues around racism in a respectful way. And
Today,
what?
Bill, can you ask everybody to mute and,
oh, okay.
because I think that's what's happening.
Okay, everybody, please mute until you are ready to speak. If you want to have 2 minutes uninterrupted time to talk about the article, you raise one hand and you'll get on the list. And I'm going to try to put the timer near my speaker so people can hear when it goes off. And if you have a clarifying question, you raise 2 fingers. Clarifying questions have to be clarifying something the speaker has said, rather than start a new topic. And in that case, you want to get on the list and raise 1 finger. We have 2. No, Sherry just joined us. Sherry, we just did introductions. If you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm popping in because I miss you all. My name is Cheryl Miller. And I just want to say last week I wasn't able to read the article, and I've had a lot going on, which I'm going to keep to myself. But I've been joining you now for several months. And right after Katrina, I found out about you, or right before, and then I lost you after Katrina. And I'm very glad to be here to listen to your comments. Thank you for letting me join you. I'll be popping in and out.
Okay. Let me say a few words about why I picked this article. And I will say in advance, I'm going to read these words because I found as I'm getting older, my short-term memory is going. And so I write things down in order to organize my thoughts, which otherwise might be scrambled. So I picked this article as it describes one more attempt to whitewash history going all the way back to 1619 and now stretching forward to January 6th, 2021, and the subsequent attempts to deny voting to people of color. It's part of the attempt to make America go back to the Jim Crow days of the 1950s, also known as MAGA. Most whites do not want to be made uncomfortable by the truth concerning their ancestors' racist actions. So they're doubling down on this racism itself. I've heard some whites say that race relations would be fine except for critical race theory, as it is divisive and racist. in itself. These whites say that critical race theory is driving a wedge between the races, but that wedge is only between whites who do not want to face the truth and are made uncomfortable by it. It's hard to avoid being political on this issue since, as the article points out, denying the impact of racism is already political. This move to continue to avoid teaching about racism in the schools is one of the latest wedge issues, like mask wearing, to distract from inaction by the GOP on critical issues facing this country, like crumbling infrastructure, income inequality, climate change, etc. It's part of a larger effort that's been going on for centuries. Meanwhile, in relation to mask wearing that we talked about, I try to avoid going to Jeff Parrish, but I had to go to the Lakeview Mall to get my iPhone fixed at the Apple Store. I noticed that almost all African Americans were wearing masks, but I was one of the only whites wearing one, except for store employees. And you wonder why there's a COVID surge going on now. Misinformation has consequences, including misinformation about our history. So with that said, the list is open. It's always hard to get the first person. Marva, and then Lynn, and then Cindy. Is there anyone else want to be on the list, right? And Becky? That's great. Okay. So we got 4 people on the list.
I was discussing with Phyllis before everyone came on. I vaguely can remember in Dallas, the book depository, and I can't remember, that act was, they attempted to burn educational books. If any of our educators that's participating today can clear that up for me, it pertains to Black education on slavery and the mistreatment of Blacks. They didn't want it to be taught in schools, and it could be when I was a teenager. If anyone can help me out with that fact. Thank you.
Okay. I'll partially answer your question.
Sorry, Bill, do you see that Greer has her hand up?
Oh, Greer has her, and Beatrice.
Yeah.
Beatrice has one finger up.
Well, Greer can only raise a hand, and that's how it works in the Zoom.
Oh, and Greer has her hand up too. Okay. So now the list is Lynn, Cindy, Becky, Beatrice, and Greer. Lynn, please go ahead.
I was a teacher for 13 years, and needless to say, I got in trouble, not realizing how you had to be uncontroversial, both in public and private schools. I once got in serious trouble for bringing someone to talk about the civil wars going on in El Salvador and Americans' part in that war. And we don't want to think that our country would ever be involved in anything bad, that we would not have trained soldiers to torture and rape. There's a question, well, why don't they want schools to teach about what has happened in our history through racism and Reconstruction? Because then people, and it was Heather Cox Richardson who made this comparison, if people start looking at the voter suppression and the denial of rights during Reconstruction and during the Jim Crow era, the activities of today will be so much easier to understand. And these right-wing people do not want people to know that voter suppression is the purpose. They want them to think, oh, it's fraud. We're preventing fraud. So we are trying, the right-wing people are trying to have Americans operate in a vacuum of ignorance. And it's a very hard thing to overcome. If the whole country does not know the history and what has gone on and what is going on, what the continued efforts to suppress votes and deny opportunities, how can they criticize? Instead, they're being fed the wedge issue. Oh, there's voter fraud going on. Black people are violent. Democrats want to open the borders to everybody. Democrats hate the country, and those kind of lies. So we're living in a kingdom of lies, and it's really hard to have a good political future if you don't know the truth.
Thanks, Lynn. I wanted to just interject for a second to address the issue, and I see you, Glenn. You're on the list now. You addressed the issue that Marva said. I don't know about the particular thing, but the Texas Book Depository, the Texas Department of Education, is one of the biggest purchasers of textbooks. And a lot of the textbook publishers kowtow to them. And needless to say, they're very conservative and they don't want anything about racism included in the textbooks. So that is one of the dampening things that's going on. Cindy, you have 2 minutes. Cindy, you have to unmute.
Sorry about that. I wish we could all live in a world that's quiet out there and we didn't have to mute. Okay, start over. Most of you know that I was a teacher for many years, a little more than 40 actually. One of the major factors in how teachers can deal with such issues is the environment that they work in. I happen to be in one of the best schools in the city, where most of the teachers and most of the parents were fairly well educated and fairly progressive. So I could openly talk with my kids about anything, and I did. In listening to their ideas and kind of telling a little bit about history. When I told my kindergartners, again, these are little kids, that when I went to school, no children with brown skin could be in the same school that I went to. They didn't believe me, which I thought was pretty wonderful, that they didn't think that could have happened. But that happened to be in a school that was totally mixed and still is to a degree, not quite as much. A lot of it depends on the principal and the acceptance of the parents. And those are all things that every teacher needs to encourage. Get to know the parents, get to know your principal and your other teachers, sort of test the political atmosphere. And be careful with what you say, of course, but you don't have to totally censor it. At least I didn't, and I didn't want to. So it was much, I think, healthier all the way around. Perfect timing.
Thanks, Cindy.
Heard the buzzer.
Okay, I'm just going to review the list and before Becky starts. So we have Becky, Beatrice, Greer, and Glenn on the list currently. So Becky, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you. I had an interesting experience between last week's talk and this week's talk. I met somebody, my partner is African American, and we were entertaining his nephews and his great nephews. And I told them about my experience on Erace and discussing the schools and entering and people of color entering white schools. And he had that experience through a program we have here called METCO, which allows or recruits African Americans into our white suburban schools, but very few at a time. It might just be one. And I have a feeling he was the only one here in my neighboring town. And one other white student tormented him. And nobody stepped up. Nobody discussed the history of race in America. Nobody had what Cindy described as a plan to integrate the classroom and make people behave well toward each other. So he had to leave the school after 3 years of being tormented. And this is the North, we should know better. But anyway, I wonder if there's a difference between teaching history and teaching policy. So, I mean, are conservatives opposed to just relating the history of slavery without commenting on it and letting the students make up their own minds? Is that possible? So I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Becky. I think you outlined two parts of the curriculum. One is history and one is civics, where we talk policy, and I feel we should discuss both. Beatrice, and then Greer, and then Glenn, and then the list is open.
Amal
So,
has his hand up.
Amal, yes.
I was very encouraged by the title of this article because I am greatly concerned about the level of and misinformation that parents have about critical race theory and what it means and where it belongs in law schools. And the people whose interest it is to keep us apart have determined that they'll make that term synonymous with teaching anything about race, teaching anything about history, slavery, colonization, any of those kinds of things, the stealing of the lands from indigenous people, anything that, and some of that is in the law. Some of it in the law says anything that'll make people feel bad, make children feel bad, feel that their country isn't a good place. How ridiculous. I mean, it just flies in the face. Are African-American people supposed to be numb? Are we not supposed to feel and sense what the history of this country is and was? The things that have come to be, for example, a mother who doesn't want the story of Ruby Bridges taught because there weren't enough good white people in that story. It's ridiculous. I mean, that's a silly word perhaps to use, but it is unbelievable that people would be so vested in these kinds of bits of disinformation. I mean, the United Daughters of the Confederacy made it their business to reteach the history of the Civil War because they didn't want their sons and their husbands and their brothers to have fought in a treasonous army whose purpose was to keep slavery intact. So I am baffled by how it is that we disabuse people of such bald-faced misinformation, like critical race theory and what it means. And I used to be a social studies teacher specialist. The books that come out of being approved in many years about history and about the sufferings of people and about what, I'll be back.
Okay, do you want to get back on the list, Beatrice?
Yes, thank you. Later on, after a lot of people have spoken, yes, thank you.
Okay, so we have Greer, Glenn, Amal, and Beatrice. So Greer and Phyllis.
I found it.
And Marion. That's great that a lot of people want to. Anyone else? Okay. Greer, I'm starting your 2 minutes now.
Okay.
You got it.
I find it interesting that all the platitudes that America was supposed to be against, like communism, but yet you want to control the thoughts of the people by what you put in books. And this is what you're teaching them, which is basically indoctrinating them. You have people who compartmentalize history, like the same people who fly the swastika flag, but at the same time, they claim, oh, my grandfather was a patriot. But last I knew, your grandfather fought against that swastika in World War II. I don't even think that it's about teaching history anymore. It's actually about teaching your opinion on a thing. And that's what they want to do rather than teach fact. I remember I had history of the Civil Wars in 2 parts when I was in college. I venture to say maybe a paragraph or 2 was on actual slavery, which was, again, a standardized textbook that I used in college. Even when I was in high school, they really didn't teach much about slavery. So basically, they're doing that to protect the white psyches because I'm here and the rest of us who are Black are here, who are native born, didn't come as an immigrant. They aren't doing anything to protect our psyche at all. So that's what this whole thing is about. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greer, I concur with what you said. When I was reading the article, it reminded me, the moves remind me of Nazi propaganda. Glenn.
Harvey has 2 fingers up.
Oh, Harvey, you have a question.
I'm
You have
sorry,
to unmute.
Richard.
Yeah.
Richard, you have to unmute.
Greer, could you clarify what you mean by the white psyche?
The white psyche, the fragility of the white psyche. It's like, if you hurt, I have to die. That type of mentality. If a white man has to suffer on any level, or people who are white, then somebody else has to pay for their suffering. It's how fragile it is. Because we have history and it's written down with truth, but you refuse to teach it. So who are you protecting? It's not me. I know my history. I know how I got to be here. I know how my people got to be here. So who are you hiding history from? That's it.
Richard, did your question get answered?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Glenn, it's your turn.
I don't think that no country that commits wrong wants that taught in their schools. I don't think that the Japanese do not teach in their history to their children that the atrocities that they committed in World War II. But I got to say that America, even though you may not have it in the school books, but the information is in the general public. What the atrocities that in the history of America have been committed. I mean, I'm not getting it from some out of some dream world. I'm getting it from the American public. What happened to the African American?
Nancy, I see.
What happened to the American Indians? All this is documented. What was said of us in the Constitution, that we weren't a human being, we were 3/5 of a human. All that's documented still in the Constitution. It's amended, but the history is there. So I don't see where we are uneducated on the history of what went on in America. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Glenn. Amal?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm very reluctant about teaching race in school from a systematic standpoint. Not because I don't think it should be taught. I just don't believe that everybody is qualified to teach it. And so if we're gonna have it taught in school, I think we need to make sure that we have the proper people qualified to teach a subject like that, because everybody, just because you have a teaching's degree doesn't put you in a position to be qualified to teach a subject matter like that. So I do agree that it should be taught. I just don't think that everybody should be teaching it. We should make sure that the proper people who are qualified to teach such a subject matter should be the ones in place to do so. So that's my take on it. The pushback is interesting though, because the same people who don't want critical race theory or racism from a systematic standpoint taught will sit back and watch LGBTQ stuff taught in schools. They won't say nothing about that, but they'll have a problem with race being taught in school. That's hypocritical to me.
Okay. Thanks, Amal. Richard has had his hand up for a clarifying question. Richard?
Let him ring it.
I have a clarifying
You have
question.
to unmute. Okay, you'll be next, and that's the two. So Richard, go
Yeah.
first.
Hey, Amal, good to hear from you again, and maybe we'll see each other at Jazz Fest this October again. Who knows? But anyway, could you please clarify what you mean by someone needs to be qualified? How do you define being qualified to teach?
What I mean is that a person, just because a person has a teaching's degree doesn't automatically put them in a position to be qualified to teach it. The person who has the proper qualifications is the person who, like us, like people who attend these type of meetings. The People's Institute for Race, what was it called? Oh man, I forgot just that quick. It was right here in New Orleans. It was the People's Institute for it slips my mind, but there are people who go to classes that are properly trained and qualified to teach about this type of stuff. And they don't necessarily have teaching degrees. So what I'm saying is that just because a person is a teacher doesn't automatically qualify them to teach about this subject matter is the point that I make.
Thanks for the clarification. Here's a problem with my short-term memory. Someone else had a clarifying question. I forgot who it was. Can you please put two fingers up?
It was me, Bill. I can't put two fingers up.
Oh, Greer. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Greer, you have a qualifying question too.
Okay. Amal, do you think that goes along with any agendas that white people push, who are the major proponent of, who want that agenda to pass, versus whether we do, in terms of teaching of gay material?
I'm sure there's some Black people involved in that. Because some of us want to run away from our history too. So I'm not gonna put it all on white folk. There's some of us who want to run away from our history and not have it taught in schools as well. So I'll be reluctant to just put that on white folks. But if you asking me for it, do I think it's the majority of the people are white? Then yeah, I would say yes.
Thanks. Beatrice, it's your turn now.
I've been thinking that if you want to look at a model of how we can deal with painful history, Isabel Wilkerson gives a good example in Caste of what the Germans have done and how they take young people to field trips to crematoria and explain what happened there. They have what they call stumble stones, where they put the names of Jewish people who were taken out of their homes during the Holocaust and during that time. And the names of those people are there, that they not forget what happened, that they remember that this was a painful time. Nobody memorializes statues of Hitler. Nobody goes around intentionally accepting flying the Nazi flag. There is a way to deal with painful history that we have to learn. We cannot run from it. We cannot pretend that it did not happen. And for older children, reading primary sources like slave narratives and reading, if you just read the secessionist papers, these people who tell the lies about the Civil War being the lost cause, the battle of aggression of the North, and if you just read South Carolina and Louisiana's papers of secession, you will know that is certainly not true. Slavery is all over there, all over. So there is a way at every grade level. If you teach Martin Luther King, so what do? We choose I Have a Dream speech as if Martin Luther King was a dreamer. Show the pictures of the people carrying I Have a Man. Make sure you show John Lewis falling on the bridge. I mean, that we have to, someone has to, and whoever is going to charge his or her conscience with their responsibility has to be willing to deal with painful history. And it is, I just cannot wrap my head around people who have decided to be against something because they think it is something else, because they're afraid of feeling bad about having been unkind and ugly and mean and killed people and stolen from their country and let them die in ships. We cannot forget that. And it's not that it's in the air and somebody's going to catch it. Children have to be taught at a grade level that they are able to understand. Older people can read, as I said, slave narratives and primary sources, but we just can't have this foolishness. We're not going to talk about this because it'll make people feel bad. I've never heard that. If that is a reason to have a curriculum, please. I mean,
Beatrice, you want to get back on the list?
I'm so sorry. Did I go over again? No, darling, I won't get back. Thank you. Though. Thank you.
Let me just review the list because it's kind of long and to make sure I haven't missed anyone. So the list now is Phyllis, Marion, Richard, Nancy, Louise, Michelle, and Nora. Did I miss anyone? Does anyone else want to get on the list? Becky. Okay. So Phyllis, it's your turn.
And Leonetta.
Leonetta. Okay.
First of all, Amal, it's the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, and they did those, I think they still are here. They do the Undoing Racism workshops. I think that's what you're talking about. So a friend of mine posted something recently on Facebook that she wasn't sharing it because she agreed with it. She was sharing it because it was horrifying. It was like a post by somebody who's like a flat earther, and reading the comments that agreed, there is a very troubling way some people write things that it looks logical, but it makes no sense. And the specific video was like, sometimes you can see the moon when the sun is still out. That was the argument, that meant the earth is flat. I couldn't even follow the argument. But I wondered, well, I felt bad for every science teacher I ever had, first of all. I felt they must be crying somewhere in corners. And I wondered if some of this ignorance has to do with so much homeschooling. Because parents can, whoever's doing the homeschooling, it's mostly parents, I guess, they can teach, they have to follow curricula, but they can spin things. And it troubles me. So I think the leadership or the people behind this criticism of critical race theory, that's not what's ever being taught in grades K through 12. That's for law school. If your kid's learning that in school, congratulations, your kid's in law school. You shouldn't be complaining. So the issue is they just want to use that term, which sounds really scary to ignorant white people and maybe others, to just try to hide history. And too bad. I learned things when I was in school, all grades, about things America did. They showed us a video that glorified Hiroshima. I didn't feel good about that when I saw that video. And I think they thought we
Philip,
would. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't hear it.
You want to get back on the list?
I'll let you know.
Okay, fine.
Thanks.
Marion. You have to, there you
go. Okay, I hit the button and then I muted again. Yes, as some of you know, I taught, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. I taught public schools and I taught in public schools in Jefferson and Orleans Parish for over 41 years. And I remember I didn't go all over the place when I did substitute teaching. I decided I would only go to schools in my neighborhood. So there's two schools. One that I went to, when the teachers found out I was a retired teacher, they would call me for long-term positions if someone went on sick leave or maternity leave. So at one particular school, I stayed there so long, Black History Month rolled around. You know, some of you know, maybe all of you know, once upon a time, it was just 1 week that was designated for Black history. So then the month came along, Black History Month. So I put pictures of people that were notable in Black history, like Sojourner Truth, Martin Luther King, of course, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Whitney Young. It was a set of pictures that I bought from a store that had lots of educational materials. I think I put up about 15 photos. It attracted a lot of attention from the white teachers that they would go to the bulletin board and they would say, oh, I didn't know about this person. The principal said that too. So it aroused some curiosity. The next day, when I went back to the school, the pictures were on the floor underneath the bulletin board. So I told the principal about it, and he actually helped me put the pictures back on the bulletin board. It happened again. So there was an assembly. Every morning, the teachers and the children assembled in the basement. The principal made an announcement, and he said, whoever is taking those pictures down, don't do it again. It's very important that the children and the teachers be made aware that these people are notable in the history of America. So the pictures weren't taken down again. So I was at the school for several months, and there was nothing in the social studies books about notable Black people who did accomplishments in the community or did something notable that made America stand out. So I had that experience of people that didn't want this to happen. They didn't want the children to know about
Marion,
these people. Okay,
I
I
let
ran
you
over
go
time.
over because you were
Okay,
telling a very important
it's a lot,
story.
and I was trying to get it all in.
Do you want to get
Sorry.
back on the list?
Not at this time.
Okay. Thank you. You were telling a very important story, so I let you go over because I wanted to hear it too. Richard, you are next.
Thank you, Bill. I think many of you probably have heard about NPR has reported on this throughout the years. There was a famous experiment done by I believe it was a European American, I believe she was from Oklahoma back in the 1950s when school integration was in the news and started to be enforced, in which she designated green-eyed students in her class, and I'm obviously simplifying it, and brown-eyed students. And she arbitrarily decided who would be, she said that the brown-eyed students, just to pick one of them, would be inferior to the green-eyed students. And that for the entire day that the green-eyed students were to treat the brown-eyed students as inferior. So to say, I just point out this, and yes, it may be the exception of teaching racial equity that doesn't prove the rule. In fact, the fact that it got so much publicity, but I think there were enlightened teachers from all backgrounds going back to the 1950s who have been able to teach race issues and have been, perhaps under the radar. But certainly this was a famous experiment that goes back to the 1950s. I'd like to quote directly from the article. Critical race theory holds that any study of American history must acknowledge that racism is deeply embedded in government policies and the legal system. This is partly where I push back, because as I've said many times before, I think the problem is that racism, I believe it should be corrected to say, was deeply embedded in government policies and the legal system, and there are remnants of it. But I think part of the pushback is to say that the entire political and government system of the country is currently deeply racist, ignores going back to Brown versus education, ignores the Fair Housing Act, ignores the Civil Rights Act.
Richard, you've gone over.
I'm sorry.
I have a clarifying question for you.
Sure.
I have a clarifying question for you. I'm sorry, as a moderator, but do you think the voter suppression laws in Georgia, Arizona, and other states are not racist?
I think I think there are racial elements to it, and gerrymandering. I mean, there are clear examples of the remnants of embedded racism. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Sherry has a clarifying question as well.
Richard, I also have to ask you, do you think our punitive system, that means our jails and prisons, our court systems, are not racist? Do you honestly believe that housing hasn't reached past a point of racism? My own area was redlined with a red line.
Right.
Everything that you just mentioned, tell me how these things, they're different. Yes, I agree with
Sherry,
you.
I think we got your question, and it's a very important one, but let's let Richard answer.
Well, Mary, my background is in city planning, community organizing, and I'm very aware of redlining, and that can be a whole separate discussion. And certainly elements of redlining are racist. It was not, in my view, set up to be a racist form of city planning. I think it amounted to that, and we can go into a long discussion about that. As far as the criminal court system, there are elements of racism when it comes to how the drug laws are enforced, but by and large, I firmly believe that the criminal justice system is absolutely not racist by and large. I think most criminals get a jury, a fair trial jury by the peers, and that's obviously another long discussion.
I think we got your feelings on this. Nancy, it's your turn.
Okay. I'm going back to where primary education, that information, even though it may not be included in primary education, the information is out there to be gotten. I think that what you learn in primary education in K through 12, that shapes your opinions for decades to come. If you choose to go out and search out other information or search out the truth, that is on you. But I think what you hold as your primary beliefs comes from your family, and it comes from what you learn in school in those primary years. And the example that I always use is that, I grew up in the Northeast, I grew up with the Statue of Liberty basically being in my backyard. And I was very clearly taught in the 5th grade that Statue of Liberty was brought to the United States, was a gift from France to welcome immigrants to the United States. That's what I was taught by Miss Green in 5th grade at Park Avenue in Chelsea. And I didn't learn until Erace by Greer that the Statue of Liberty was brought here for the abolition of slavery. It was a gift to the United States for the abolition of slavery, and that the change could be seen at her feet. And the reason that it's on a 50-foot pedestal is that you can only see the chains from the air. You have to be in the air to see them. Or in the crown, and you could look down, but you can't go in the crown anymore. They have closed that off. So I think that the fact that political forces are trying to change laws to eliminate certain parts of history is racist, and will shape opinions for decades to come. It's ringing.
Yes,
Okay, I'll get back on the list because I do have more to
Okay.
say.
great. Thanks, Nancy. Louise,
Yes, I've been having to write things down because there's so many comments I want to make. Firstly, Amal, you said that you have to be educated to teach race, and
Marion,
totally, I totally agree with you. And but what I believe is that and I'm an educator, so each year at the beginning of the year we have to go through these really boring ass
Lynn, I see you.
trainings and professional developments. I think everyone should be made to do one of those educations that you were talking about, and I've been to one, and they are very enlightening, especially for white people mainly.
Marva, I see you.
And I think every teacher should be made to go through that training before they start the school year, instead of the really ridiculous ones they give us that just a waste of time, in my opinion. So yeah, I do agree with that. And then Glenn, you said that people, it doesn't have to be in history books because it's out there for people to go learn. Get to the real world. People are not going to do that on their own. No, you have to be you have to have some very good reason, or I don't think people are going to go on their own. Not many are going to go on their own and educate themselves about such things. So yeah, it might be out there, but no one's going to really go do it for themselves. Shaming kids. Okay, to say that it's going to shame the white kids and make them feel bad. No, I totally disagree. I think it's teaching them. It's teaching them a more holistic way of the world history and making them more empathetic and more understanding. It's not shaming them. And if it is, so what? They're obviously looking at it the wrong way. But I totally believe that, it's not going to shame kids or make them feel bad about themselves. Oh my God! Oh, and Richard, that study was fantastic. Actually, I read about that study a long time ago, and maybe I should get back on the list.
Okay. The list is very long now. And, I think let's at least temporarily close off the list with Louise, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people on the list, which I am very pleased with, that people want to talk about this. So Michelle, you're next.
Oh, thank you. A lot of people have kind of said what I was going to step up to say, which is about the history and teaching history and going out and learning it on your own. That's totally my story, and I think that if you ask a lot of high schoolers, past, present, future, kids in school today, history is not a subject they enjoy learning. It's a study, it's a subject that I don't know what it is, but I never enjoyed history growing up. I thought it was rote and boring, and I did fine, but it was all memorization of facts, and so it was nothing in if I learned history the way I've been learning it in the last couple of years on my own, I would have been very engaged. So I dispute that people are going to go out there and, again, like Louise, get the information for themselves unless they are motivated for some internal reason to do so. So, my kids are a testament to that too. They don't like history either. They say it's boring. So, but yeah, that's really all I wanted to say was I disagree with that fact on people taking the initiative on their own. I think they have to have a reason to do that themselves.
Thanks. Nora.
Hi. So I taught middle school in East Texas for 20 some years. And I think I did some things that would have been considered somewhat subversive. Um, I did show my students that video about the blue-eyed, green-eye experiment. And I want to address qualifications. I had one student, and a Black student in my class, that his reaction to the discussion and various activities around Black History Month was to be disruptive and acting out. And I did not handle it well. And so I wasn't qualified. I had the best of intentions, the best heart, but I didn't know how to deal with that. And I think it was probably very confusing to my students, who would go home, go back into their community, and how do they make sense of what I showed them in class, and then go back into the community that was very racist, and everybody knew their places, both white and Black, in order to have any kind of sense of a peaceful community. And I think that I think that would I think we have to think about mental health in reacting to the teaching. And some students will get PTSD from from hearing things for the first time that are just brutal and unbelievable and true. And how do we deal with that? I certainly wasn't qualified. Yeah, that's all.
Thanks. Let me just recalibrate here. Okay, Becky, it's your turn.
Thank you. Well, I was thinking about my early days, like 5th and 6th grade and camp. And I remember that both in school, my grade class, and in camp, we had a least liked girl. And and the least liked girl was tormented pretty much by the whole class, except that I chose to be kind to the least liked girl. And I was told by those who were perpetrating this idea that I would be sorry if that least liked girl left, because then I would be the least liked girl. It's really kind of funny, the whole thing. Well, anyway, so it would be a good idea if teachers had better training and worked harder to have their students get along without being tormented. And I think that takes more training, as the last lady, sorry, I'm bad at names, spoke about. But also now in schools, there's a social worker often in each elementary school, which is probably not enough. You probably need a couple of social workers in each elementary school. And then, so I think we need better training in our classrooms and better understanding of that training by teachers and by the parent teachers groups, more support. Then, in addition to that, I hope that history can somehow be taught so that it isn't boring. And I don't know about policy in early grades. I hope we could stay away from policy and just teach well, it's hard to teach the facts because everybody has a different idea of the facts, but be more factual, I'll put it that way. So this was very interesting, and it really made me think about this all the way through. Thanks a lot to everybody.
Thanks, Becky. Leonetta, it's your turn.
Good morning. I think I agree with Greer that this the critical race theory has become the latest code word, the big boogeyman, and children, like Nancy said, are not taught that through the younger grades. That's a college level discussion. That's something that's taught on college campuses. And I just want to put this question out to everybody in the group this morning. I was at a Black social workers convention, and the speaker asked this question, and I think I just would like to know if anybody would be offended if if a high schooler was asked to write an essay on this question, these series of questions. One of the questions that I was asked, well, what would the world be like if the first whites that went to Africa were killed? Another question I was asked at this meeting, what would the United States be if the first whites that were brought here to the United States were killed and no other whites came after them? What would the United States be like? And I just want to, and this speaker spoke on those two subjects. And I just wanted to know, would anybody on this in this group, if that high school student was given that topic to write an essay on and was graded, would that make them the stuff that the writer is saying, that it would make them scared or whatever these excuses they're talking about, which is crazy. I'm just putting this out there. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to address your question in my wrap up. I think it's a very good one and very thought provoking. Nancy, it's your turn.
I just wanted also to go on again, and I was going to say that this term critical race theory has been co-opted from universities who teach it as a class in their law schools, okay? And it has been co-opted by people with another agenda entirely to cut out teaching anything that has to do with race, racism, and like white fragility that's going to make people feel bad about their ancestors and whatnot. And I compare that to, if you got two kids and somebody broke grandma's crystal bowl, okay? And you ask them, who did that? Okay. And one of them is standing up there lying, talking about he did it, I didn't do it, he did it. And the one who didn't do it is standing there looking at him like, you're lying. Okay, when you stand up there teaching that, I remember it was like a paragraph, probably in the 5th grade again, about slavery, you know, and the Civil War. Oh, and the slaves were very well treated and were happy. That's what they put in there, you know, one sentence about slavery, you know, and you come to find that was not true. But how many years did it take to find out that that was not true? So I mean, it's just the whole thing. It just reminds me of two kids trying to tell the same story and one is lying. Okay. Also, I just wanted to say that in Williamsburg, they have a lot of plantations in Virginia, and particularly in Virginia. And Williamsburg, the attraction Williamsburg, I remember taking my kids there, and they started having characters as slaves. And it was uncomfortable initially. It was a guy who was a blacksmith who was playing the character of a blacksmith, as slaves were trained to be blacksmiths. And but as this was the beginning of it, but as time went on, and I pretty much, if there was a plantation, I took my kids to see it. More and more plantations began to incorporate slaves in their presentations of life on a plantation. And initially it was comfortable, but people are comfortable with it now. So I think if you start more and more the truth, people will become to accept it and become more comfortable
Nancy,
with
I
it.
kind of let you go over a little bit to finish.
I'm
your
sorry.
thought.
Okay,
That's
but I
okay.
think Harvey's got a question for me.
Harvey, yeah, Richard, you have a
No,
question.
Richard, I'm sorry, I ain't gonna get over that. But go ahead. Unmute. Unmute.
Hi, Nancy. Could you clarify your statement that you read, if I have it wrong, tell me, that you read in a textbook that most slaves were well treated and happy. Were these the actual words you read, or was this your
Yes.
takeaway?
No, that's what it said. The slaves were well cared for and happy.
And you remember that from 5th grade?
Clearly, yes, I do. Just like I remember Miss Green telling me that Statue of Liberty was brought here for the immigrants.
Okay, I'd love to see the textbook that said that.
Well, I can't produce that, Richard.
Okay. Well, I believe in source documents, so if that's the
Richard,
case, I'm
Richard,
like,
you were asked a clarifying question. Now you're going on to your topic.
Presenting
You can
your
address
take
it
on
in
my
the-
statement and challenging my memory.
Yeah,
And
I
I'm
know.
sure there are other people here who read the same thing in their textbooks. I see heads shaking, so I'm not the only one that read it.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm not denying you said it.
Richard,
I have a clarifying question.
Richard, stop. You asked your question, you got an answer, and
Okay.
now you're getting into a back and forth situation that we do not tolerate here. If you want to speak anymore, you'll have 1 minute in the wrap up. Thank you. And apologies to Nancy for that exchange. Marion,
Well, I have a clarifying question for Nancy.
yeah. Go ahead, Greg.
Nancy, in the presentation of these people who are portraying slaves, do they get down to the brutality and the true nature of how they were held and kept at these places?
No, they don't. At least the ones that I went to did not. They didn't go around saying, oh, we were well cared for and we were happy. They don't do that. But they just talk about what their role was on the plantation, you know, about what they did, where they were, this guy in particular was a blacksmith. And that's pretty much it. That's what I saw. So they don't present it in a negative way. It's kind of neutral. Okay, just the fact that they have a slave there is, I think, negative enough. They don't really get into the brutality of slavery. No, they don't. They don't talk about that. Or at least I haven't seen that.
Thanks, Nancy. Whitney Plantation does a better job of all this.
Yes, it does. Been there 5 times.
Marion.
All right, let me finish the story I was telling. I was saying that oh goodness gracious, the pictures of the notable Black people were thrown on the floor under the bulletin board. So after that happened a couple of times, the principal made an announcement and said, don't do it anymore. These children need to see this. And I was actually doing a segment in the classroom about each person whose picture was on the bulletin board. I would say, this is Sojourner Truth, and she was very relevant in trying to help Black people, enslaved people, get their freedom, blah, blah, blah. So after the announcement by the principal in the assembly, don't take those pictures down again. The pictures did stay up until the end of what was designated as Black History Month. Not only did I teach about the history of Black people, there was a calendar that I got from the educational supply store that designated days for people of Spanish heritage and Native American heritage. And there was nothing in the book about it. So I actually had to get materials from the educational supply store, put pictures up on the bulletin board, print out copies of paragraphs that had readings about these notable people that made contributions to America. So that was what I did to try to give people the notice that they deserved, that all of these people, American Indians or the Native Americans, people of Spanish heritage, Black people, Portuguese people, Italian people, whoever they were, that made contributions that made America what it was. And it wasn't easy. And I did get some pushback from one particular parent. She would go to the principal's office and complain, and the principal would push back. So I was able to get this out to the children, and I thought this was very important that they know about all of the people
Thanks, Marion.
that
I
made
let you run over a little
contributions.
bit.
Thank
because,
you. That sure is a
you were
short period of
doing
time. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. You were telling a wonderful story about a very courageous thing that you did. So I really appreciate it. Glenn, it's now your turn.
Thank you for listening, everybody.
Glenn?
Oh, okay. Sometimes I can't tell the difference between when you're saying Lynn or Glenn.
Oh, sorry. No, it's Glenn.
Yeah.
You got it. It's you.
Yeah. History, it tells your beginning, and it tells your recent past, and it kind of like predicts your future. And I don't look at it, I just don't look at when I view America, I don't look at it through an emotional lens. I know a lot of, give me an example. I know a lot of people who have criminal passes, but if you view them today, you can't see that in them, that they are criminal. You wouldn't even know they were criminals. You wouldn't know they were drug dealers and people who were very crude in the business of drug. You wouldn't know it. So I look at America. If I'm gonna judge America, I'm not gonna judge it back in slavery. I'm gonna judge where they have come today. And I've seen the white people of this country who no longer want to tolerate people who were Confederates and having statues of them. I've seen them tear those statues down. So I'm looking at the history not in a view of what a person, what America was. I'm looking at what America is today and where I feel the future is going to be. I'm not looking at it emotionally. And I believe one day people will be able to be in the school and hear the actual facts of history, but not telling the facts of history to just make someone to look bad, but just to show where we have come from.
Thanks, Glenn. Okay, now we have Marva and then Louise, and then we go to the wrap up.
Oral history is very important, but not sustainable, because how many people live to be over 100 years old? The destruction of books and documentary films, the printed word and visualization of books and films have a mental impact, because if you see it or experience it, it is not likely to be forgotten. Oral history can be retold, but it can change or distorted with repetition, and facts are lost. So the destruction of books and film is a way of preserving history, and awful history that we set out to change can be lost. And so I don't depend on oral history. I depend on written facts films, documentaries. Thanks.
Thanks, Marva. Louise, it's your turn, and then we go to the wrap up.
Okay, so back to this study about the blue-eyed, brown-eyed being, dominant in the school in the 50s. This teacher was doing this. It was an amazing study. I recommend everyone looking into it. But it was actually to prove academics and how the way that kids are treated, different kids are treated, and how their ability to succeed in class differs. And it was amazing. Like the kids that were, not allowed to step in line first, were not allowed to play with a certain area in the playground, were not allowed to do this. They were kind of the downtrodden for the day. They literally did worse in tests. Their test scores were just obviously lower. And it's all back obviously down to self-esteem and the way you're treated. I mean, it was a really interesting study, and this teacher was really good to do that. Which leads me to how kids are treated today. Kids of color are treated, there is no denying the fact they are treated differently by teachers in class, which leads to the big spiral of not succeeding, not doing well, leading them down. It is true, and I've seen it. I'm in school, every day, and I do see how it does, it affects the kids' learning. Anywho, I think we should give kids credit for being able to deal with the real history. Obviously, grade school is going to be a little bit tempered down than high school, but I do believe that we should teach, we should just broaden the horizons of what we teach. The Pearson's books that we all use, they are absolute rubbish. And yes, I agree with Nancy. She's not lying. There are such things that, that said, and still to this day, really sugarcoat the experience of enslaved Africans completely. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, you'll get a minute in the wrap up, Louise.
I think finally,
according to my list, and please correct me if I leave anyone out, Kate was the only one who did not speak. And so Kate gets the whole 2 minutes and everybody else gets a minute. So Kate, it's your turn to go for 2 minutes.
I just have a couple of comments. I think that racism should be taught in the schools because slavery and racism has affected the distribution of wealth of the Black people in the country in the past, present, and it's going to affect our future as well. And then going back to something that Richard said, kind of related to that, the legal system, I think, is racist just because of the fact that economic wealth difference. If you don't have the funds, you can't post bail or you can't hire an attorney to represent you well. I know everybody gets an attorney, but that doesn't mean that you represent it well. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we're going into the 1 minute and then I'm going to do a wrap up. Let me just adjust the timer here. Okay, Phyllis, you get to go first in the wrap up.
Thanks. I just want to address what Glenn said about stuff being out in the air for people to learn, but people have to be curious and people have to maybe have questions about what they were taught in school. And if you're not questioning that, you're not going to go looking for other information. And I'll give an example. Glenn, in one of our in-person discussions, you said that the Native Americans had no culture, no government amongst themselves. And I imagine you learned that in school and you didn't question it, but we told you about the Iroquois Confederacy that existed before any white person came here. So there's lots of people with lots of different topics that they just accept what they learned, or they don't have time. They're out there struggling to make a living and they don't have time to learn anything different. So, and also Leonetta, those essay questions sound really excellent. I would love to read those essays that kids would write about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Marva, it's your turn for a minute to wrap up.
during my school, elementary school years, they had books on Low Black Sambo and Low Negrito. I would have rather hear true stories, like my low blonde hair, blue eyed friend on the plantation. We were best of friends until she got 10 years old and her mother separated us and told her she could no longer be friends with me because I was a slave and she was the owner. That's a true story.
Thank you, Marva. Michelle, for 1 minute.
I don't really have much else to say, but it's been an interesting conversation for sure. One of our better ones, I think. It's a topic that's definitely got a lot of press lately, and obviously, so it's good to talk about it here. So I'm glad you brought it up, Bill. Thanks.
You're welcome. Lynn. Lynn.
That's me.
Yes.
Well, we have a big struggle on our hands because Trump has said that he likes uneducated people. That's his base. And that is the philosophy of the Republicans. Anyone who knows anything is part of the elite. And that's a terrible thing. So ignorance is prized above all. I want to talk about, if I can, educating all the teachers about the realities of racism and our history. There needs to be a critical mass of people who believe that racism is a problem and that our history has really disadvantaged a whole group of people. When I was a young lawyer, there was a young man in my law firm who went away to summer program to learn law in Greece. And he came back and said, Lynn, I thought you were a nutcase, that nobody could believe anything like you. But all those Northerners who were in my law class in Greece are also liberals, are also Democrats. He just thought reality is what he had seen in the South. And we need a critical mass of people in the schools who understand what racism is and understand how it has disadvantaged and affected people over the years. We cannot step forward until we learn our past. So thank you, Bill, for a wonderful topic. And let's educate all the teachers so that when the time arises, they can witness and testify to the kind of fair America that we want to have.
Thank you, Lynn. Louise, it's your turn.
Here, Lynn, that's totally, I agree with that. And Glenn, I think we talked about it last week as well. I mentioned this last week, being half full, half empty, about dealing with where we are with race in this country. I think out of everywhere else, I'm always a half full person, very positive. But I think when it comes to this, we have to be half empty because there is still a whole lot more to do. Yes, we have come, thus far, we've made some accomplishments, but I do believe that there is a long way to go. So we need to stay half empty on this and stay focused and stay on our toes. Great discussion. Thank you, Bill. That was and good facilitating. That was a great discussion. Have a great.
Beatrice, you have a minute now.
I wrote some stuff down, so I try to stay on topic. First of all, the sum of us, if anybody questions that there was serious input from the federal government to build a white middle class, and there was not that same input where we are concerned, you need to read that and be sure that racism has been a great issue. Daughters, that PBS had Neutral Ground, you all may have seen it. It was basically about the taking down of the statues, but it was a documentary called Neutral Ground. But one of the things that was in it was the United Daughters of the Confederacy writing textbooks that their first issue was Civil War was not about slavery. Second, slavery was not that bad. There were some good masters. They really put this in textbooks for children. And that those narratives were passed down through generations. And what has happened is something that was empirically based, that you could prove what slavery, what the Civil War was, you could get documents, began to be an ideology and people began to tell those stories, and people believed it that the Confederates were saving, there was the lost cause, they were saving the world. I used to teach a class when I worked in Montgomery County Public Schools called HR 17, Human Relations 17. It was taught to all new teachers, and the requirement was that every teacher had to take it. It was the teaching of the contributions and culture of all groups in the country, Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland were very, very diverse, very, very diverse. And there was also
Beatrice, I let you, I let you go on because you were saying really good things.
I'm sorry.
I apologize for interrupting now.
Thank you.
But I'm going to pick up on what you said in my wrap up too. Cindy.
Again, so much depends on the environment of the school. I was very lucky in my teaching because the whole school pretty much supported the mixture in the school was wonderful. You'd be hard pressed to find a better environment for children because it was black, white, mixed, and probably 7 or 8 ethnicities beyond that. Ideal. But people will make of whatever environment they're in, hopefully the best they can. I don't know. I'm hopeful. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Nancy, it's your turn for a minute.
Hi, I just wanted to say that I think what's going on with the whitewashing of the history of America is likened to 1930s Germany, and that we need to do everything. That's why it is so important that we pay attention to our local elections, okay? And who we're putting into office in our local elections, because this is the outcome that you have if you bypass local elections. That's all.
Thank you, Nancy.
Very good topic. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome. Marion, it's your turn for a minute.
I'd like to say thank you, Bill, also. I am very, very glad that we have this group of people here on Saturday that are basically of the same mind as to what we can do to promote civility and ensure that all people, all human beings, have a right to the pursuit of happiness. And it is liberty, freedom, whatever this country is supposed to stand for. There's so much hypocrisy. And we all know that it was not, the happiness, the liberty, the freedom was not designated for originally for people of color, but for white people. So I am so glad that we have this opportunity every Saturday to express our feelings as to how humanity is supposed to be treated. Thank you, Bill, for this topic.
And thank you for your words. I share your feelings about the value of this group. Leonetta, it's your turn for a minute.
Thank you, Bill, for picking this topic. It's something that's dear to my heart. And Nancy, I went to a predominantly white school, and I had this. I must have had the same book or another a version of it. I bought it, showed it to my parents, and they told me, my mother was a teacher, and she said, "Well, you know your history, and you know that's not correct." So, and that's where it ended. She felt like it was a loose, you pick your battles, and that just wasn't one she wanted to have. So she just said, "You know your history, so don't worry about it." So, and also I just want to remind everybody that the teachers union is prepared because they know that they will, some teachers gonna be brought up on some charges somewhere in the United States about this made up issue about critical racial theory that is not thought taught in elementaries, K through 12. So I just wanted to remind everybody, just keep posted. We're probably going to see in the national news some teacher that's going to be brought up against on some charges. But the teachers union is prepared.
Leonetta, you raised a very good point, and it's not one I thought of, but you're absolutely right. There will be court cases on this. So, Becky.
Wonderful discussion, wonderful leadership. And I just wanted to say about the least like girl story, that if we hadn't all been white and there had been a dark-skinned person there, they would have been the least like girl. I think that was my point in teaching that we've really got to work on the classroom being a friendly place to everybody. That's the teacher, the parents, and the Parent Teachers Association. And yes, somewhere along the line, we've got to teach history. And I think things are better the way Marva and her brother express it. I think more people are more knowledgeable about the evils of slavery and the continuing oppression of people of color through our legal system. So thanks for the discussion. We got to keep working, keep voting for the right people.
Great, thanks, Becky. Glenn, Glenn.
Well, I hate to leave on a sour note.
No, you don't. They ain't causing you no heartburn.
But you know, the problem is not white people in this country. The problem is the African American. He still thinks like a slave. He still thinks like a slave. I can't do nothing unless master allow me to do it. That's the way we still think. You know, I can't make no progress in the country unless white people change. They stop being racist. You know, racism is our biggest problem. You know, no, it's you the biggest problem. You're holding back your own progress. No, you're not taking on the responsibility of a human being supposed to take on. That is the issue. And like I said, it's a sour note to leave on, but that's it.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn. And Richard, it's your turn for a minute.
I'm unmuted. First, I do want to apologize if for my back and forth in my clarifying question. Too often people paraphrase what was taken as read literally, and Nancy clearly remembers that she read it literally. So I apologize for that. My issue here is that I would be very surprised if any textbooks currently in circulation talk explicitly about happy slaves who were treated well by their slave masters. And I think the fact that if there are few, if any, books that actually state that currently in schools is a testament to how far we've come in teaching, racial issues and racism. And I'll read one more quote from that article. Conservatives have leveraged outrage over critical race theory to denigrate any conversations about race and equity.
Okay,
I think that's wrong. I think, all right.
You've exceeded your minute, but finish your sentence.
Well, my point is that the issue is not having any conversation about race and equity. It's how it's done, and done, yes, by qualified teachers in a way that is meaningful to students and is productive and talks about as much about the contributions of African Americans as it does about the legitimate and the suppression of Blacks under slavery and enslavement. So,
okay,
of course, it needs
Thanks.
to be, both sides need to be taught.
Thanks. Nora, it's your turn.
Just quickly, I I enjoyed the meeting again, and I appreciate all of your contributions to my do-over in my own education. That's all.
Thank you. Cheryl,
Thank you for a great article that got us all interested. Thank everyone for their comments. It takes a lot of work, and this is how it's done. I believe that we had a meeting about how we should discuss things and talk to each other. So I would love to review that. I tried to find that. I wanted to mention, I put it in the chat. There's a website you can go to that gives you a lot of information, like People's Institute, dismantlingracism.org. I put it in the chat. And there's an article in that called White Supremacy Culture. We're all suffering from it, is what I believe. I'm glad that the mystery man, whatever your name really is, that you apologize, because I felt great feelings of discomfort when Nancy was challenged about her memory. It's a form of white supremacy, I believe, when we challenge and question a person of color instead of just listening when we're white. That's a school thing that I'm doing for myself. Thank you for letting me speak.
okay. Wait, I have to get the timer set. Okay, Greer, and then Amal, and then I'll do my wrap up. So Greer, you have a minute.
This isn't about emotion, the teaching of fact, not opinion, in terms of the Black community. The pushback is coming from the white community who doesn't want the truth. History is about truth and facts of things that occurred. And who's feeling the pain about this? It's not Black people, because our history has rarely been taught, if ever. And if I agree with Nancy, one of my best teachers was a 6th grade substitute teacher who came in when I was in 6th grade. My teacher went out on maternity leave. He's since passed. He was murdered like when I was in high school. But everything he taught us as Black kids was prophetic. He prepared us for our future. I had that man for maybe 5 months once my teacher went out. But that's what we need. We need teachers. He went outside the book to teach us. And I guarantee you, till this day, every so often something he says comes to my mind because it's appeared on the TV or it's happening. Our foundation is what carries us to adulthood. Thank you.
Thanks, Greer. Great points. Amal, and then I'm going to do my wrap up.
Yeah, great article. I think all of us could go back into history, find something that we didn't learn. You know, I didn't learn about the 54th until the movie Glory came out. You know, and I was in 7th grade at that point. I didn't even know Black people fought in the Civil War. That's just the way history was taught in schools. We learned about the Civil War, but we didn't learn about the contributions of Black people to it. So we can all go back in history and find something. And then you have to look at history twofold. You know, the way the Japanese is going to teach about Pearl Harbor is not the way the United States is going to teach about it. It's just, I'm sure the Japanese got a completely different version of Pearl Harbor than what the United States does. So we have to be able to contribute our history to history, so that it won't be misunderstood once one is being taught to generations of people who are unborn and who just don't know anything.
Good point, Amal. In Vietnam, they refer to what we call the Vietnamese War
as the American War.
The American War.
Yeah, I'm clear about that.
Yeah. So you raised a bunch of good points, and I'm going to get to it in my wrap up in a minute. But the comment that redlining was not initially racist is a good example of why we need to have clear history, because not only was redlining racist, but it was government sanctioned racism. The FHA guidelines for giving loans after World War II to settlements like Levittown explicitly said no African American will get a loan in this area. And the people who bought houses had to sign a document that was legally binding that they would not sell their home to an African American and they would not rent their home to an African American. And this was the greatest contribution, as Nancy and others have pointed out, to the current income inequality. So income inequality in America is government sanctioned. It was government sanctioned. And that's a legal grounds for reparations, in my opinion. So we need to be clear about our history. And I learn things every time in this group. One of the facts I didn't know that the Statue of Liberty was given to this country by France to congratulate us on abolition. That's a new fact. And I went to it's interesting that France, Cindy and I did a Black History in Paris tour with Lynn, and Lynn was the one who secured the guide. And there's a statue in the Luxembourg Gardens, which is where Lynn is now sitting, that has 3 rings in it. And they're links in a chain, and the top one is open, signifying the freedom from slavery that France did in 1848. So they were a little late coming to it, but earlier than this country. The middle one is completed and said, we got to be ever watchful because we can go backward to slavery. And the last bottom one is embedded in the earth. And this says, we need to keep our roots with Mother Africa. So that's a statue. The French originally abolished slavery in 1794 when the French Revolution, but then the Caribbean plantation, when Napoleon came to power, told Napoleon, if you don't give us back our slaves, we're going to join the British and oppose you. So Napoleon reinstituted slavery. So anyway, Beatrice talked to, and Amal as well, talked about the qualifications of teachers. And most teachers, black or white, who grew up in our education system are not qualified to teach racism based on their education. Now, many of them have self-taught themselves through that, but there needs to be seminars, continuing education requirements for points for teachers to educate them on the impact of racism. Many people don't know the fact that I mentioned that the FHA explicitly sanctioned racism in the 1950s. And that's a fact. And that needs to be taught. And it's just one of many things that need to be taught in terms of these issues. So in most European countries, I have no idea what schools are like in Africa or South Asia or China. But I do know we have Cindy and I have a Dutch friend and a Spanish friend, and we asked them about racism, and they said in slavery, and they said it was never taught. And Holland is a particularly progressive country, but my friend who was about 20 years younger than us said she didn't encounter any mention of the Dutch, who were major perpetrators of the slave trade, of their participation. And the same thing with the Spanish gentleman who was 40 years younger than us. And he said in Spanish schools, and again, Spain was a major perpetrator of the slave system, and it was not taught in those schools either. So it's a universal thing. One of the great sources for education, probably most of you know this, is the Zen Education Project. And they have a lot of really good teaching materials on racism, on the treatment of the Native Americans. Oh, I just remembered one thing. I wanted to answer the question that I'm trying to, what Greer proposed. What would happen if the first Europeans came to America, were killed by the Indians? Well, actually, that's what happened.
That was
I'm
Leonetta.
reading a really good book now called The Year 1000. And the Vikings came to North America, and the Vikings had better weapons than the indigenous people. The indigenous people's weapons were made of wood, and the Vikings had metal steel swords and steel spears and steel hatchets and steel armor. But it wasn't that big of an advantage. If it was equal numbers, the Vikings would win. But there were far more indigenous people, and the Vikings realized that they were going to get slaughtered if they stuck around. So they went back to Europe. And it was 500 years later when the Europeans had guns and cannons that gave them a massive strength over the indigenous people that the Europeans were successful in conquering North America and the rest of the world of people of color. But it took 500 years for them to develop the weapons that happened. So again, that's another bit of history that should be taught in the schools. The history of Europeans coming to this country. The first time they did it, they realized they were outnumbered and they left. So anyway, thanks for the discussion. I really learned a lot from it, and we're gonna miss next week, but we'll hope to be back in 2 weeks.